The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a series of webinars called Beyond the Numbers. Today is session number 5 in the 6-part series, and this one is the important role of nutrition in heart health. We're very excited that you have joined us today. Before we get started, I wanted to just give a few housekeeping rules. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you cannot hear, please check the audio button on your personal computer to assure the sound is on. That seems to be a very common issue, and so check that first. Please type all of your questions into the chat box at any time during the presentation, and the moderator will read your questions during the question and answer period out loud. Unfortunately, with this large of an audience, we are not able to unmute you to ask your question. But the good thing is you can ask the question anytime during the presentation, so it's always at the top of your mind when you enter it. The PDF version of the slides, as well as the recording of the presentation, will be available on the Mended Hearts website following this event. And there is a handout available in the handout section of the webinar today, and it will be also on the website. So this webinar series is brought to you by 3 great organizations. Mended Hearts, their mission is to inspire hope and improve the quality of life of heart patients and their families through ongoing peer-to-peer support, education, and advocacy. The National Lipid Association's mission is to enhance the practice of lipid management in clinical medicine. And the foundation of the FNLA, their mission is to improve the welfare of patients and families affected by cholesterol and triglyceride problems. We're very honored to have with us today Penny Kris-Etherton. She is with Pugh University Professor of Nutritional Sciences and the Department of Nutritional Sciences at the Pennsylvania State University. And I am Andrea Baer, the Executive Director of Mended Hearts, and I will be your moderator today. So before we get started, I would like to quickly give you, don't worry, it's no pressure, a couple of questions to just determine your ability to understand what we're going to be talking about today. So I have a poll up on your screen. We'll give 2 questions. The first one is describing the way that you eat right now. So once we do this one, then I'll give you the second question, and then we'll get started. I am going to close this question in 3 seconds, so hurry up and get your vote in. Okay, the second question might be a little harder, and it should be up on your screen as well. Your amount of vegetables per day. What is the right amount that you should have? All right, I'm going to close the poll in 3 seconds. So hurry up and get your voting in. All right. So without further ado, I would like to turn the webinar over to Dr. Kris-Etherton. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about healthy, delicious, nutritious, and budget-friendly foods. And before I start, I'd also like to express my gratitude to Mended Hearts the National Lipid Association, and the foundation of FNLA for making this seminar series available. The next slide shows my disclosures, and you can see my research grants and scientific advisory boards that I'd like to make known to people. The next slide shows topics for discussion. So I'm going to be talking about dietary recommendations for heart health, and then turn our attention to health and economic disparities, a growing problem in our country today. Spend some time talking about food deserts and how to navigate them, and meal planning for families with time and financial considerations. Talk a little bit about how you can stretch your food dollar, and then answer to questions that you've asked previously and ones that you're raising now. So the next slide shows key elements of healthy eating patterns. And here are 3 key overarching recommendations for a healthy diet. First, consume a healthy eating pattern that accounts for all foods and beverages at just the right calorie level for you. Not too high, not too low, unless of course you want to lose weight. A healthy eating pattern includes the following food groups, and all of them: a variety of vegetables, including dark green, red and orange, legumes, starchy, and another group as well. I'll be talking a little bit more about this. Fruits, grains, of which about half of the grains that you eat should come from whole grains. Fat-free or low-fat dairy products that include milk, yogurt, cheese, and or fortified soy beverages. A variety of protein foods that include seafood, lean meats and poultry, eggs, legumes, nuts and seeds, and soy products, and liquid oils. And also a healthy eating pattern has limited amounts of saturated fat and trans fat, added sugars, and sodium. So the next slide shows where we're getting all those nutrients that we want to limit. First is added sugars, and you can see the main source of added sugars in our diet are beverages. And we're drinking a lot of sugar sweetened beverages, but also fruit drinks and sports and energy drinks as well. We also get a lot of added sugar from snacks and sweets like candies and pastries too. So we should be consuming less than 10% of our calories from added sugars. That really means less than 200 calories a day, but that allows us about 12 teaspoons of sugar. The next slide shows where we're getting our saturated fats. And you can see the #1 source is mixed dishes like pizza, burgers and sandwiches, meat, poultry, and seafood dishes, and then some other mixed dishes like rice, pasta, grain dishes, and soups. We get about 13% from dairy products and about 15% from protein foods. So you can see almost 2/3 of the saturated fat we get comes from animal foods. The next slide shows where our sodium is coming from. What I find really interesting is that this maps along with food sources of saturated fat. So we're getting about 63%, almost 2/3, from mixed dishes, dairy products, and protein foods. And you can see that the mixed dishes are the same ones for saturated fat. So if we can watch those mixed dishes, those full-fat dairy products, and protein foods, we can control both saturated fat and sodium in our diet. The next slide shows specific recommendations in terms of foods we should be including in our diet. And I really like this slide because it's very consumer oriented. And you can see it tells you exactly how many vegetables you should have every day. You really need about 2.5 cups of veggies, but there are specific recommendations for dark green, red and orange, legumes that include beans and peas, starchy vegetables, and other vegetables. And the other vegetables include things like iceberg lettuce, celery, summer squash, cauliflower. And you can see specific recommendations for fruits, 2 cups a day. So actually, this is kind of surprising to a lot of people. We should be consuming 4.5 cups of fruits and vegetables a day. Grains, about 6 servings, of which half should come from whole grain and the other half can come from refined grains. Dairy products, about 3 cups a day, or an ounce of cheese is considered a 1 cup equivalent. In terms of protein foods, we can have 5.5 ounces every day, of which we should be getting some from seafood, meat, poultry, eggs, nuts, seeds, and soy products. And then we should be getting some liquid oils, about 2 tablespoons a day. And then we can have some extras. And basically, these are other calories. It's almost 300 calories, and they can come from added sugars, solid fats, and alcohol. So the next slide shows then how we put together these food-based recommendations. So you can see here a healthy plate, and from the National Lipid Association, a healthy plate is one that has half that's filled with vegetables and fruits. About 1/4 of it is from lean protein products, fish, poultry, lean meats, or plant proteins like tofu or nuts and seeds. And then about 1/4 is from either whole grains, like brown rice, or starchy vegetables like potatoes or sweet potatoes. Corn is another starchy vegetable. So the next slide then turns our attention to race and ethnicity disparities in the United States. And we know that heart disease is the leading cause of death and disability in the United States, basically among all ethnic groups. The good news on this slide is that you see for all ethnic groups, there's been a decrease from 1999 to 2017. But what's readily apparent is that there are racial and ethnic disparities, and that is that Blacks, African Americans have the highest rate of cardiovascular disease. Asians or Pacific Islanders, have the lowest rate. And in between, we see heart disease rates for whites, not Hispanic, and then Hispanics and Latinos. So what I find pretty amazing here is that Blacks, non-Hispanics, have almost twice the rate of heart disease than do Hispanics. So there's great concern about these racial disparities, and people feel that we really need to do something about it, and be one way of markedly decreasing the leading cause of morbidity and mortality in the United States. So how can we do this? Well, the next slide shows 7 simple ways to achieve cardiovascular health that's ideal. And at the top right, these are behaviors: eating healthfully, losing weight, getting adequate physical activity, and stopping smoking. And all of these behaviors will help us control blood pressure, control blood cholesterol levels, and then reduce blood sugar levels. And just achieving recommendations for all of these can markedly reduce cardiovascular disease in the United States and worldwide. But surprisingly, on the next slide, less than 1% of Americans are in ideal cardiovascular health. So we have tons of work to do. And on the next slide, you see, look at the left, is that, the different ethnic groups have different rates of meeting just 5 or more criteria for cardiovascular health. Not even 7, but just 5 or more. And what we see here is the disparities are with non-Hispanic Blacks and Hispanics. And we see that with those two ethnic groups, only a little over 10% are meeting 5 or more criteria for ideal cardiovascular health. Now, non-Hispanic whites and non-Hispanic Asians aren't doing much better. They're only between 20 and 25% of them are meeting 5 or more of the criteria. But we have a lot of work to do for everybody, but in particular for African Americans and Hispanics. We really need to help them meet the criteria for our cardiovascular health. So now let's turn our attention to food deserts on the next slide. And a food desert is an area that has limited access to affordable and nutritious food. Now, you're going to see a desert landscape here, and yeah, there is some food, but most of it is not healthy. Well, there's a healthy banana and a healthy avocado, but we see a lot of other foods that really are not nutrient-dense foods and really don't fall into those food categories that are being recommended for a healthy, nutritious diet. And in fact, on the next slide, we see that in a food desert, there really aren't supermarkets where people can, buy the food that they need to eat a healthy diet. So we see here that food deserts are areas with both poor food access, not a lot of supermarkets, but also there are a lot of low-income people. Surprisingly, in the United States, this land of affluence, there are about 23.5 million people who live in a food desert. That's amazing. And the next slide, a lot of these people, basically do their grocery shopping in a local corner store. And it's apparent that, these local corner stores don't have a wide variety and lots of food that enable people to meet food-based recommendations for, a healthy diet. And again, that's one of the criteria for ideal cardiovascular health. But on the next slide, you see that a lot of these food deserts have a lot of fast food eateries. And it's okay to eat there once in a while, but you're not going to achieve a healthy diet and a nutritionally adequate diet by eating sodas, fries, shakes, nuggets, burgers, especially, triple burgers with cheese and bacon and all that on them. And you can see in this slide that it's a long way away from a supermarket. But boy, there are a lot of these fast food places in these food deserts in the US. So what do we know about living in a food desert? Well, you can see here that living in a food desert is associated with a higher risk of adverse cardiovascular events in those who have coronary heart disease. And you can see that their survival rate, if they're living in a desert, they have heart disease, which most Americans do, many Americans do, they don't live as long as people who live in a non-food desert. And a lot of this is because they don't have access to healthy, nutritious food. So what's happening in the United States now? The next slide shows just the unemployment situation, which is really grave. There are a lot of people who are employed. Now, when the COVID crisis hit in March, boy, you can see we went from about a 4% unemployment rate to almost 15%, in May. A lot of people lost their jobs and lost their livelihood and their ability to buy healthy foods and also take care of their families. So the next slide shows a sequence of events. In January, the first patient with Wuhan coronavirus was identified in the United States. In January 30th, WHO declared a global health emergency. In March, The CDC recommended no gatherings of 50 or more people in the US. In April, early April, cases topped 1 million and many people lost their jobs. And on May 27th, coronavirus deaths in the US surpassed 100,000. And now we're at over 135,000. So it's not a pretty situation. And so on the next slide, you see that there's a hunger crisis in the United States. And here are just some pictures of what's happening at food banks. You can see on the left-hand side, long lines, people waiting to get food at food banks. And on the right-hand side, you see people massed up collecting food at the food banks. The next slide shows, how severe this situation is. So read the bullet points at the top, and you can see that food insecurity is increasing at a very fast rate. So, for example, at the Boston Food Bank, before the COVID pandemic, it was distributing about 4 to 5 million pounds of food a month. In March, it distributed 8 million pounds. In April, 9.5 million pounds. And in May, it was on track to distribute more than 10 million pounds of food. And then you can see in this, or if you go back, just look at the map. If you go back, just look at the map. And what you see is that there are hardly any states that have less than 14% of the population who have food insecurity. But we see many states, and a growing number, who have 20% or more of the population insecure. That's 1 in 5 who just don't have enough to eat. And, orange is 18 to 19%, and the lighter orange is 16 to 17%. So we could easily say that about at least 15% of our population is food insecure because of the coronavirus. And that's why the next slide, I think, is so relevant, because people need to know how to eat healthfully while on a budget. The average meal cost $3.02 in the United States in 2019. So let's just say for a family of 4 to feed them 3 meals a day is going to cost about $36. Now it's more than that because it's 2020 now, but $36 a day when a lot of people really have lost their livelihoods. So the next slide then, I think it's a real good resource for anybody who's interested in healthy eating on a budget. And it's a USDA online resource, choosemyplate.gov while on a budget. And there are a lot of good tips that are shown on the next slide that are very helpful for basically stretching your food dollar. And so you can see at the top, create a grocery game plan, and that is plan weekly meals and make a grocery list, and then pay attention to a lot of the specials that the supermarket is having when you're there. And then the next bullet point is shop smart to fill your cart. And I'm going to go over tips for every aisle, but then I think it's also important to understand the price tag so that, the price you may be seeing is for the price per pound of a specific food, and the food may actually be packaged in a 2-pound package. So it's going to be double what you think it is. So make sure that you're reading the price tags carefully. And then read the food labels as well, because you really do want to watch out for saturated fat, added sugars, and sodium. And the food label will help you with that. So let's turn our attention now on the next slide to tips that you can follow to, I think, help stretch your food dollar in every aisle. And I'm going to go through these for fruits and veggies, grains, protein foods, dairy foods, and the other category. So in the next slide, let's look at fruits and vegetables. And there are a lot of bullet points here, as well as a link that you can access at the bottom to help figure out ways of saving money on fruits and vegetables. Remember, we want to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. And yeah, they can be expensive. They don't have to be. So you're going to want to buy and season. And then canned foods and frozen fruits and veggies are okay, but make sure that they're not loaded with sodium and fancy sauces that add a lot of saturated fat. If you have freezer space, buy frozen veggies because in many instances they cost less. And then also look to, canned and frozen fruits too, but make sure that they're not loaded with a lot of sugar. Next slide shows what you can do in the grain aisle. So pay attention to whole grains and just check the ingredient list to make sure that the first ingredient says whole grains. Typically, these foods are, whole wheat, brown rice, bulgur, buckwheat, oatmeal, whole grain cornmeal, whole oats, and whole rye. Rice and pasta are really inexpensive. And I think rice is, a very versatile food too, that you can combine with beans. I'll be talking about a little later on. And then choose hot cereals like oatmeal. That's, very inexpensive. And whole grain snacks. One in particular that is a great one is popcorn. It's a whole grain food that's pretty low in cost as well. So for protein foods, what you can see are that some great low-cost choices include beans, dried beans and peas. And again, when you pair them or combine them with rice, you're getting a complete protein. And again, these are very versatile, so you don't have to eat them the same way all the time. And to lower meat costs, you can buy family-sized or value-packed meats and fish, and then freeze what you don't eat. Choose lean meats like chicken or turkey. And when you choose beef, make sure it's lean beef. Seafood doesn't have to be expensive. Pay attention to specials and look for canned tuna and salmon or sardines. And then eggs too. You don't want to eat too many eggs, but they really are a low-cost, great protein food. And then for dairy foods, what you see is that you're going to want to focus on low-fat or fat-free dairy products. Buy the larger size because they're cheaper, and that plain yogurt is a lot less expensive than individual fruit-flavored yogurts. When it comes to cheese, pay attention to ones that are reduced fat or low fat. And then just pay attention to the date, the purchase date, because you don't want to buy a great big container of milk when it's past the due date, and it all goes to waste. And then other. So drink water instead of soda. It can be cheaper. And tap water can be really good rather than buying bottled water. If you're concerned about the quality of your water or the taste of your water, you can always get a filter. It's a one-time expense that you can use over and over again and save on buying bottled or canned water. So the USDA has some wonderful resources that you'll see on the next slide. And so they have Healthy Eating on a Budget Cookbook, and these are all online. So you can access those free of charge. The next slide shows how you can eat very healthfully on a budget with this particular resource. I think it's really great, extremely helpful. Shows you how you can have a healthy plate. Have half of your plate be fruits and vegetables. and then have protein foods comprise about a fourth, and then either grains or starchy vegetables be the other fourth. Okay, the next slide now shows how you can stretch your food dollar. And, there are a lot of dollar type stores that are in food deserts. And so my colleague Lori Alexander and I checked these out. And basically we found that there are a lot of foods that you can buy at these particular stores. And so we put together an infographic that you're going to see on the next slide that is a handout that you can all access. And basically it's a shopping list, heart healthy eating on a budget. These are all foods that are available at a dollar store. So take a look at it. They're healthy foods and foods that you can get at low cost. So the next slide then is answers to questions that you had previously. So the question came up, is grapeseed oil healthy? In fact, all liquid oils are healthy. They're low in saturated fat and high in saturated fat. You can certainly include them in your diet. Is soy healthy? And is there a concern about estrogen? Well, soy protein is a plant protein food, and we're told that we should be eating more plant protein foods. There are phytoestrogens in soy protein foods, but they're really not a health concern because they're present in small amounts. So I wouldn't worry about them at all. Tofu is a really good meat alternative. I would recommend that you avoid soy isoflavone supplements though, because they're high in phytoestrogen. And what about highly refined canola oil? Well, again, all liquid oils are healthy. They're low in saturated fat, high in unsaturated fat, very heart healthy. What's the difference between homogenized versus non-homogenized milk? Well, it's just how the milk is processed. So that homogenized milk has all the fat globules broken up so that they're homogeneous throughout the milk product. And otherwise, the fat will float to the top. And what's the difference between organic versus non-organic? Well, the main difference is, how the cows are raised. And so they have to be fed a certain way, they have to be treated a certain way. But in terms of the milk that you get from them, the milk is compositionally and nutritionally the same. Now, some organic milk is ultra pasteurized. And so that means that it's pasteurized at a higher temperature for a longer period of time so that it has a longer shelf life, because sometimes the organic milk sits in the cooler longer than non-organic milk. So it may taste a little bit sweeter to you, but basically, they are very similar. Now you're going to be paying more for organic versus non-organic, but other than that, nutritionally, they are very similar. So at this point, I'd like to thank you for your attention and answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you so much for that great information, and especially how to access more inexpensive foods and still stay on our heart healthy diet. I will go to some questions, but I would like to first, while I'm pulling up the questions, I would like to do just a couple of quizzes again to test what you think now after watching the webinar. So the quiz is up on your screen while I am queuing up the questions. And it looks like we have a lot of really great questions. I'm going to give everyone a moment to test their knowledge now, and then we will get with the questions. So while this is going, I'm going to go ahead and read the first question, and it is a good one and a question that I would like to know as well. Sam is asking, carbs convert to sugar, therefore should cutting out most carbs help reduce sugar in our system?
Well, that is a very good question. So I would say, your body does need some carbohydrate. And, fruits and vegetables are sources of carbohydrate. Whole grains are a source of carbohydrate. I think it's good to follow current recommendations, current food-based recommendations. In the past, we were recommending much, much more refined grains in our diet, much more grain products in our diet. And people could eat 6 to 11 servings. That's too much. So now just 6 servings a day, of which half come from whole grains, spread out throughout the day, is really not a concern about getting too much sugar.
Great, thank you. So the next question comes from Jane, and she says, I was reading an article from PubMed that stated people over 65 utilize protein at a lower rate and should be eating more protein. What is the formula for how much protein a 70-year-old needs a day? Seems like the chart does not include as much protein as a recent research article.
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. And I think we really should be mindful about our protein intake, but not overdo it. So I think a good guide for older people is about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. Now, you know how to convert pounds to kilograms. Just divide pounds by 2.2. You know how many kilograms you weigh. And about 1 gram per kilogram would be enough. For other people, the recommendations are a little bit lower, 0.7, 0.8 grams per kilogram. So, it's in the ballpark, but it's not excessive. And I think that's the key thing to keep in mind. Also, a lot of people, a lot of older people don't eat enough protein. So this is a very good question. So just be mindful that you get enough protein. So focus on the food-based recommendations in the protein group, and then dairy products or dairy alternatives provide protein for you.
Great, thank you. All right, so the next question is, what percentage of true nutrients of fruits are actually retained when it's canned?
When it's canned?
Yeah.
Vitamin C is the one that is a little bit challenging. And if the fruits are heated, then, it's going to destroy some of the vitamin C. But a lot of the other nutrients are still there. So, some of the fat-soluble vitamins are still there, or the fat-soluble vitamins are still there, and dietary fiber as well is still there. So, I wouldn't worry about that so much. Sometimes with fresh fruits, if they're sitting in the grocery store for a long time, they do lose some of their nutrients just by hanging out on the shelf for a while. So some canned fruits can be good alternatives.
Great.
If you,
I would assume better than none, correct? I mean, if
yes, absolutely. Yeah, and get them in water or 100% juice, and not in the thick sugary syrup that sometimes they come in. And then there are all these fruit treats where you can get fruit in Jello. Don't do that. The fruit cups I think are really good. I get applesauce, unsweetened applesauce in fruit cups, and I think it's really good. Put it on my oatmeal in the morning. Very delicious.
Great. All right. So how many eggs a week should be in a heart healthy diet?
And this is a very good question. And there's, some controversy about this, but I'm going to give you my opinion. I think that, especially if a person has heart disease, if a person has diabetes, then 2 to 3 eggs a week is a good amount to go with. Some people would say, well, you can have a little bit more than that. What I don't think you should do is eat a 3-egg omelet every day. So you see that with those food-based recommendations, you can see. Let's look at that for just a minute here. Let me find that. Okay, so meat, poultry, and eggs. So it's 26-ounce equivalents per week is what's recommended. So that's about 3 to 4 ounces a day. And so, you don't want to eat 4 eggs a day. You don't want to eat 3 eggs a day. So I think mix it up. Some people would say, well, you could have 1 egg a day. But I think if you have heart disease or diabetes, you should just mix this up. You can have some eggs, but just don't overdo it.
Great. And then there are multiple questions about non-dairy products and healthy alternatives to dairy. So I'm just going to kind of group them together. Almond milk, soy milk, addressing the issue of substituting these types of things versus the regular dairy products. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think the key thing to pay attention to there is make sure that it's a healthy alternative. And in particular, soy milk is fine. Soy milk is fortified with vitamins A and D, and compositionally, it's quite similar to, regular milk, if you so choose to go that direction. I think, what you really want to avoid are all of the flavored milks that have a lot of added sugar. So just be careful there. Now, with almond milk, make sure that you're choosing a healthy alternative. And see what it says in terms of how much protein is included. With some of these, nut milks, there really aren't many nuts in them. There have hardly any nuts at all. I don't know how they can be called, whatever, almond milk or whatever milk it is. So, if I were you, I'd go to the supermarket and stand, at the cooler and compare regular dairy milk with the alternative that you're looking at. So look at calories, look at protein, and look at other nutrients. And then look at the ingredient label and just see, is this a flavored milk? Is it loaded with sugar? You can even look at the nutrition facts label. Is it loaded with sugar? So that's what you want to avoid. So smart shopping is really important.
Great. So someone has a question about low fat not necessarily being good, and that they've read that good quality full fat is better and fills you up more, such as an avocado or whole organic milk. Can you address that?
So this is a very good point. Years ago, we thought low fat was the best way to get people to decrease saturated fat. But what everybody did then was they cut out the fat and they added a lot of carbohydrates and a lot of simple carbohydrates. You might have heard about the Snackwell era, and that's what we were doing. We were adding a lot of, fat-free cookies to our diets and not paying attention to sugar. Then we realized, okay, that's not healthy. But now we know that, good fats have lots of health benefits. So the suggestion about the avocado, it's a good healthy fat. Nuts have good healthy fats in them. And then vegetable oils, the liquid oils, are very healthy. With dairy products, they are a source of saturated fat. So you just have to be careful and, incorporating full fat dairy products into your diet. If you're used to full fat, well, start with changing over to 2%. They're almost the same, and it's a way to step down to maybe 1% if possible. Because you want to control the saturated fat in your diet.
So I know you discussed how much protein we should be taking, and to make sure that we're looking at a very physically active and in different things. But one question here is, if somebody does not consume enough protein, what is the effect on the body?
Well, if you don't meet your protein needs, you're going to break down muscle mass and lose muscle mass, and that's not good. So you need 5.5 ounces of protein a day on a 2,000 calorie diet. And you want to get some of that from seafood, get 2 servings a week. And then, 3 to 4 ounces per day of meat, poultry, and eggs. And then some nuts, seed, and soy products, about 5 ounces a week, so about an ounce a day or so.
Great.
But it's really important to meet your protein needs.
Okay, great. What is your opinion on things like the Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat versus 90% ground beef?
Well, I don't like the Impossible Burger because it's a highly processed food. I think the idea about meat alternatives is a good one, but a lot of these products are ultra processed. And so they have all sorts of things in them. A lot of them have coconut fat, and just a lot of ingredients that you can look at and say, what is this? Now, I haven't tasted one, but I think they do taste delicious. They're really, very tasty. But I think be careful with them because they are high in saturated fat and they have lots of sodium.
Great. Would you recommend the Mediterranean diet for someone with diagnosed high cholesterol level?
The Mediterranean eating pattern is one healthy eating pattern. So, there are 3 healthy eating patterns recommended in the 2015-2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. So the Mediterranean diet is one. There's just sort of an average American. It's called the Healthy Eating USDA pattern. And then a vegetarian or vegan. So any of those are healthy. And so I would let my food preferences guide my decision as to which one I could follow for the rest of my life and that I would really enjoy.
Great. And here's another question on the same idea of meat substitutions. Things like corn and it's QUORN. I'm not sure if I'm spelling that right. Is it safe? And also, what is a microprotein?
Well, corn is safe. It has to get past the FDA, so it's safe. And I'm not exactly sure what microprotein is. Let me look it up while we go for another question.
Okay, great. And what diet for dyslipidemia would you recommend?
Well, I think it depends upon what the dyslipidemia is. If it's high triglycerides, it's one diet. If it's high cholesterol, it's a little different. If it's very, very, very high triglycerides, it's, a different diet than just moderately elevated triglycerides. So I need a little bit more information about that.
Okay. Are there any websites to help people who are on blood thinners with healthy eating? Many items on the lists are worrisome for us.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You have to be careful about vitamin K intake and the fruits and vegetables that you eat. So I think the best thing to do there is, if you can, talk to your doctor and see if you can work with a dietitian because you really have to watch your vitamin K intake if you're on certain blood thinners.
Right. So a couple of other questions are surrounding the idea of egg whites and egg beaters, placing just a full egg.
Yeah. So with egg whites, they can be very tasty. You're getting all the protein, a complete protein, and they can be real versatile. You can make some really delicious, egg white omelets. And then, the egg beaters, they're basically made from egg whites, so they're fine too.
Okay.
Oh, so one of my colleagues just sent a note. Mysterious microproteins have major implications. Wahida, are you on this webinar? And can you say something?
If she raises her hand, I could unmute her if you would like her to talk about it.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Yes. So if you're listening, if you would raise your hand, I will find you and unmute you, and then you can share your knowledge with the group. That would be great.
She is down there. I tried to unmute her, but she has herself muted.
Oh, okay.
I'll send her an email and say, please unmute.
There you go.
Is she unmuted? Okay.
All right. So the next question while we're waiting on that, does vitamin D2 help prevent or protect against COVID?
Well, what we do know, well, we don't want to say, gee, you got COVID because you weren't eating salmon, which is a source of vitamin D. We really can't say that, a particular food or a particular nutrient is going to protect against COVID. But one thing we can say, let's forget about COVID now. Let's just talk about the immune system. And what we know is that a healthy diet can build a strong immune system. That doesn't mean you're not going to get COVID, so I don't want to even go there. But what everybody should be doing is eating a healthy diet to have a really good immune system. And that means following, what I had just recommended.
Great. Thank you. So can you supplement plant protein for animal protein and still have a healthy diet?
Absolutely. That you can follow a healthy vegetarian, a healthy vegan diet, and you don't have to have any animal products whatsoever, and you can still have a very healthy diet. What you have to do, though, is follow it the right way. Now, a lot of you may find this interesting. So I have some friends, they tell me that their daughters who are in high school have decided to become vegan, and their idea is to eat French fries and drink cola beverages. Now, come on. That is a plant-based diet, but it's a very unhealthy plant-based diet. And, there have been some really good studies done by the Harvard investigators that have shown that, you can have a really unhealthy plant-based diet that is just as bad, if not worse, than the average American diet. So the thing is, if you want to eat all plant foods, by all means, go ahead, but just do it the right way and you can have a really healthy diet.
Great. And so as a follow-up, the question about the Mediterranean diet was in relation to losing weight, so maybe 20 pounds. Would that be, is the Mediterranean diet good for weight loss?
Yes, it's one dietary pattern that's very good for weight loss, and there are others as well. So the key is, I think, to cut calories in a healthy way. And so if a Mediterranean diet helps you adhere and follow a calorie reduced diet long term, go for it. but there may be another option that you like better. The key is you want to find a diet that you can follow for a long time to lose weight and keep it off.
Great, thank you. Another question about egg whites. Are they an option for protein? Do they have?
Absolutely. Yeah, they're a great protein. They're a complete protein. Actually, they're low in calories and again, very versatile, complete protein. And I like egg white omelets a lot, especially with veggies. It's a great way to help incorporate the foods that I recommended in a sort of an interesting way in your diet.
Great. So I know we're coming up on the 4 o'clock hour, so I have just a couple of questions left, and I will get to them. But before I do so, I want to make sure that we let everyone know that our last session of the series is coming up on July 29th, and this will be expert answers to your frequently asked questions about managing lipids. And we are going to take a lot of the questions from our 6-part series. We will have a patient along with the presenter to answer all kinds of questions. And so it will be very interactive. If you're interested, please make sure you register. It is an evening webinar for us on the East Coast. It is on July 29th at 6 p.m. But just a couple of more questions before the top of the hour. What is your opinion regarding increased inflammation associated with animal protein?
Well, yeah. I think the key thing is, to eat a healthy diet. And so there have been some studies that have shown, increased inflammation with a high animal protein diet. So, I think what we're saying here is what you really want is a diet, your plate should be half fruits and vegetables. A small portion of it, 1/4 of your plate, can be healthy animal protein, like fish. That's considered an animal protein. I am such a strong advocate of consuming fish and seafood. And then, 1/4 of the plate, either starchy vegetables or whole grains. And so I think the key is, not to go out and eat the triple burger without the bun that has all the cheese on it and then bacon to boot. But you can include some animal protein. Just don't overdo it and be mindful of the rest of your diet, the rest of your plate.
Great, thank you. And 2 last final questions. Excuse me. One is there any solid recommendations for a vegan diet anywhere online that somebody can look up? And the other question is how can you shop wisely when you can't look at labels because you're ordering food delivery because you're avoiding going into stores? And so maybe if there are any online options for looking at food labels.
Yeah. So the first question is, you could go to choosemyplate.gov, go to that website, and there are all sorts of resources there for following a healthy vegan diet. Now, in terms of looking at food labels, well, the only thing that I can recommend, I do this a lot. So if you're shopping online, then, just go to the website. So whatever, let's say you're getting some canned beans, then go to that company's website and look up the nutrition facts for those canned beans.
Great. And I would like to also add, only because I know this from personal experience, if you're ordering online at places like Walmart for their pickup or delivery, if you click on the actual item that you're putting into your cart, you can get the nutritional value on the website. I have to do that because my son is allergic to the milk protein, and so I have to make sure there's no milk somewhere hidden in it. And it has come in very handy during this time of COVID to be able to read the labels online. I have found that I can't read all of the labels sometimes, and I just avoid that, that item that I'm purchasing. But there are ways that you can look up online as well from each store that you're shopping from. So finally,
Yeah.
have
Somebody else, I think it was Gita, and Gita, if you're on, somebody sent me an article about microproteins. And so, Gita, do you want to unmute and say something about them? This is really a good article.
Yeah, I know that Wahida she says she is here and unmuted, so I'm going to let her talk.
Okay, great, wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wahida. Thank you for allowing me to say something. Actually, I know nothing about it, to be quite honest, except that microproteins are not from foods that we eat, but something that happens in the body at the cellular level. And scientists are looking, just recently there have been articles, 2019, and it's kind of interesting to look at to see what these microproteins at the cellular level can do to cellular stress. So honestly, I think we can all learn from this question because I know nothing about it.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow, that's wonderful.
Thank you. So with that, I appreciate you jumping in. Hopefully everyone has learned a lot. I am going to launch the final quiz or poll, I should say, not a quiz. There's no grades associated. While I thank our sponsors, Amgen, Esperion, and Novartis for this series, we are very appreciative of their support of this activity. And just remind you that the webinar recording, along with the PDF of the slides and the handout, will be available on the Mended Hearts website. When you go to the homepage of mendedhearts.org, you will see the blue Beyond the Numbers graphic. If you just click that, it will take you to the entire series. You will be able to access any of the ones you might have missed. And this one will be up probably tomorrow by end of day, depending upon how the system works. And then we will be right back here on July 29th at 6 p.m. With our final session of the series, and that will be expert answers to your frequently asked questions about managing lipids. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time, and I hope that you've learned something. And Dr. Kris-Etherton, I would like to just thank you for joining us and spending your hour with us today. Everyone, have a great day.
Thank you.